Lisa, hi. So nice to have you on the first episode, the first ever episode of Colony's Builder Spotlight. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm very excited.
Absolutely. Me too. Me too. So, Lisa, just before we jump in, and seeing as this is the first ever episode of Builder Spotlight, I just wanted to give a little bit of context around what it is we're doing here, what the DAO's Builder Spotlight is about, and just give those watching a bit of an sort of insight into what we're going to be covering over the next few weeks. Okay,
Awesome.
cool. So, essentially, the Builder Spotlight is going to be a journey where we follow one community member building a DAO from scratch. And in this case, that's you, Lisa. So welcome. And every 2 weeks, we are going to publish a new video on YouTube where I meet with you and we discuss what you've been working on, the decisions you've made, the progress you've made, and sort of all of the problems and the struggles you've been dealing with over those 2 weeks. Okay. So really, we are going to be giving the audience a front row seat into what it's really like in building a DAO. And we are not just going to cover all of the Web3 crypto DAO stuff. We are also going to look at your mission, your vision, your strategy, your product, your marketing, community, and then also obviously all of the DAO stuff like governance, treasury, contributors, and compensation, and all the rest. So jam-packed 3 months, and it's really going to give those who watch, give them a raw, unfiltered view of the good, the bad, and the ugly. So that is what it is. And how is it going to work? Now, for this series, for the 3 months that we are going to follow your journey, and for any subsequent series beyond this one, we will feature one DAO and follow the startup journey from 0 to 1. And each DAO must define a very clear and specific goal that it is trying to accomplish over that period. Now, Colony will issue little micro grants over the 3-month period, which you can use to cover your expenses. And if the DAO also achieves its mission within the 3-month period, Colony will also award a token prize to the DAO that the DAO can spend in whatever way it pleases. However, I think the main benefit to you, the DAO builder, is not really the financial rewards, but more the one-on-one support that you'll be getting. So the advice and mentorship. And Colony, we will also tap into our network of Web3 experts and try and provide you with the guidance that you need. And on top of that, also leverage our audience and our community to promote your DAO and use it to raise awareness and help you out with your marketing. So lots of other benefits around that. So that's how it's going to work. Now, Lisa, you and I have also sort of defined a couple of goals for the series, which I'd like to dive into. I think there's 2 things that we're trying to get out of this first series. And the first is to address all of the core aspects of starting a DAO. So educating, teaching, and getting people to learn of what it's really like to build a DAO. So I think that's the first goal, educate. The second then is to inspire. So really inspire people to start something by giving them a realistic and an honest view of what goes on in the process. And hopefully by the end of the series, people will look at you, Lisa, and go, do you know what? If Lisa can do it, so can I. So the second one is to inspire. That's sort of the goals for the series. And goals for the episode, again, I think you can happily add to this, Lisa, but I think it's just to sort of get people interested in the DAO that you're building and the rest of this video series. And you explaining to us what it is you're building. You are building PictureBookDAO, very exciting. Tell us about the vision and the Web3 version of publishing. And also then set the expectations of this being an experiment and the fact that it might fail, but also later on through today's episode, talk about what we will be covering going forward. So that's enough from me. Is there anything you'd like to add around the goals for the episode or the series?
I think one way I'd like to think about it is, in addition to, this being a sharing experience and inspiring is also like a form of video journaling
Mm,
as well, where I'm also using it to keep myself accountable and
right.
reflect on my own experiences, and hopefully through my honesty or intended honesty and transparency, it would give people a better sense of what it's like, at least for me, to have done this. And because a lot of times you see interviews with founders and you get a very different story. A good story, it's not a false story, but it's one version of a story that is not necessarily representative of the journey. And if you try to like replicate that,
Mm,
you might have like false expectations of, because real life is messy, and this is a opportunity for people to see a little bit of what that looks like.
right, right. Yeah. I think this is the ultimate form of building in public. Like
Yeah.
this is you showing everyone what it's
Yeah.
like. And going forward, I'm going to get you to share your screen and show us, like actually
Yeah.
show us. This is not just you talking about what you've done.
Yes.
And yeah, it's going to be messy, but it's also going to be a lot
Yeah.
of fun. So I'm really, really excited. Okay, cool. So I think that sort of tells people what the series is going to be about, what to expect. So I want to dive in, but before we go into the DAO Web3 thing, I want to take a step back and just give people a better understanding of you, who you are, and tell
Yes.
your story, and just sharing your background and your history and your professional career. So feel free to go back as far as you think is relevant, and just tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Okay. Well, I'm first going to give you the sort of resume interview answer, which
Uh,
is, it's like more glossy. I went to Columbia for my undergraduate. I studied computer science and philosophy, and then I got a master's also at Columbia in operations research. I started focusing on product work and entrepreneurship. And then my first job out of college, I was a product manager at a computer vision API company startup. And then after that, I started doing entrepreneurship consulting, where I both did internal projects for the company itself, as well as consulted on new ventures, and whether that be products or new companies that are spun out from existing corporates. So, and then more recently, Prehype, the company I worked for, funded me to start my own startup. So that's what I've been working on. And yeah, so that would be my sort of like, oh, I've just met a person at a networking event. This is like how I talk about myself.
okay.
I was thinking about this question earlier, and when I was younger and I heard people talk about, and even now when I hear people talk about their career path, it always sounds very nice. Like, oh, so and so went to this school and they got this job and they got this other job, and it like sounds so good. But the reality is, in the spirit of like sharing and being honest and authentic, the reality is that my journey was not straightforward. There was a lot of times like in between things where I didn't go from my first job as a product manager at this like computer vision company that has
Mm,
raised all this money and blah 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 to like doing entrepreneurship consulting. I was actually laid off when half the company got laid off. There was months in between where I wasn't really sure what I was going to do. I had felt like maybe I missed my chance to go to like a really big company because they mostly recruit straight out of college. I'll talk a little bit more about the different ways in which opportunities present themselves.
yeah.
But one of the things I think is important for anyone trying to do something different or do something new to keep in mind is that the path is not necessarily linear. It's not that you're like, oh, hey, I want to do XYZ, and then I'm going to go Google how to do XYZ and then contact those people and they're going to give me an opportunity. It's more like things
Mhm.
just happen, and then there are a lot of moments in between where
Yeah.
it can be difficult. On an emotional side too, it's like, yeah, now I'm saying like, hey, I have this and I'm like starting my own company, and it all sounds so great. When I hear other people describe me, I'm like, wow, that doesn't even sound like me. But there have been moments like in between things where I felt really horrible, because I was like, oh shit, like I don't have a job. I don't know what I'm doing next. I
Right.
tell me like, oh, are you just like burning out, or like don't like, there's so much like anxiety around one's career. I think that can be difficult when people are trying to maybe do something outside of their job, or even change jobs to do something that isn't conventionally
Right.
and like you don't have like institutional validation of like, oh, I work for, you know, this company, or I think that can be difficult too. So I don't know if I've gone too far off
No,
topic, but
yeah, and you know what? I think I sort of want to transition into Web3 and crypto and DAOs,
yeah.
because I know you've been saying that, you know, your previous career has been like this, but yet here you are, and you're willing to just jump in again, and willing to be vulnerable, willing to fail, and this is what's so awesome about it. So tell us a little bit more about your journey into crypto, Web3 DAOs, whatever you want to call it.
Yes. So this is another example of, you know, also like how I came across this opportunity. If people are watching, like, you know, I didn't know anything about crypto until maybe like a month and a half ago. And through my colleague who mentioned like, hey, something DAO, and he like sent me a document. And I was like, I don't know anything about any of this. Like I've heard the term blockchain before, but that was it. And I just started doing a bunch of research just so I can understand, you know, what my colleague had sent me. And yeah, I joined a bunch of Discords. And once I joined the Colony Discord, the moment I had joined, I had seen a notification actually from you about the podcast DAO, the podcast discussion group. Sorry, not DAO yet. And it was like, okay, like we have a podcast discussion group about DAOs. It is in 45 minutes. The podcast was 45 minutes. So I remember thinking, hey, I could do this. Like I could listen to the podcast and I could join the discussion group. But I was also like, but it sounds like a lot of work. And I also don't know anything about DAOs. But I was just sort of like, well, why not? So I listened to the podcast, I joined the group, and that was my first really intro to really DAOs, honestly, and also Colony. And that group later started a DAO. You know, I came up with the idea of what I'm doing here during this season will be writing a children's book, a picture book, about explaining like the fundamentals of crypto. And that was actually an idea for that group, and that didn't work out for a variety of reasons, but then it morphed into this. So one, I never could have imagined that this is what I would be doing like a few weeks later. I could never have planned that. And it was more just like I went with my interests, and then like opportunities came up, and I just like kind of went with the flow there. So I think that's also, I think, you know, when we are in school, we're taught how to do things with like a very clear roadmap. It's like, here's your equation, and then you follow along, and then you do it on your own with like slightly different numbers. And I think a lot of people, including myself, left school with that kind of mentality, hoping that like, oh, if I want to do XYZ, I need to figure out how to do it. Whereas whether that's building a business or coming across this opportunity or any of, honestly, my other opportunities, they didn't come like, oh, I want to do this, and then I go search for that. It's more like taking one step at a time, and not everything leads to something, but oftentimes things do, and you can't really plan that out ahead of time. I have to admit, I'm not a going with the flow type of person. I don't want to give people like the false impression that like I'm like the planner type of person. I go on a road trip and I have like multiple routes and like Google Maps, Waze, Apple Maps. I have like, you know, spreadsheets. This is not part of my personality, but it's more just a reflection of this is how things have worked in my experience in like the real world, which is that things just happen. And the other thing I wanted to touch on about my journey to crypto, and kind of relates to one of the motivations for why I'm working on this topic, is I had heard about crypto related things for many, many years. But for a variety of reasons, I never looked into it. It was not purely because it wasn't interesting. I think I did find it interesting, but something in hindsight I realized was preventing me was that I think, I don't know what it was, if it was because I saw the people I saw who talked about crypto all the time, they did not look like me, didn't act like me. They have like a very bro-ish, the ones I had encountered at my school and, you know, in my environment, they had like a more like bro-ish, you know, it's also like, it's not, you know, this does not say like this is for me, but I think there's also like a sadder and more like insidious reason, which is that even though, you know, I went to like a great school and have, you know, 2 degrees in technical fields, there's always this sense of like, oh, this isn't for people like me. maybe it's too hard, which if I really think about it, I genuinely don't think it's too hard. I think that children can understand the fundamentals. So, but still, like, this is a subconscious thing. And I think it prevents a lot of people from learning new things, because it's just when you grow up and you don't see people like you doing certain types of things, that kind of like feeling, it seems kind of silly when it's irrational when I talk about it out loud, but I'm just realizing, like, so much of my experience, that kind of feeling, like, it holds me back all the time. And even though, like, rationally there should be no reason for that to be the case, it just represents, I think, how hard it can be. I'm not saying everybody who doesn't get like crypto or know anything about it has this experience, but I think with topics that have both like a very visible persona as well as can have like technical aspects to it, it can be alienating, I think, for certain groups of people, especially marginalized groups or people who aren't conventionally represented in those areas.
So you ended up at Talking DAOs. You joined us during that discussion. Something must have piqued your interest around DAOs, because you're building one now. So is there something particular around DAOs that you find fascinating?
Yes, there is. And there are a couple different things. Firstly, though, I do have to say, to be totally honest, there is a part of me that's trying this just because it's like new, people are talking about it. I don't want to be like left behind by like the times, so there is that is like a practical reason. One of the very specific things that I find fascinating about DAOs is, and also Web3, is the shift that allows customers and consumers to also participate both in ownership, and what ownership means, like financially, as well as having power over decisions, and just having that dynamic shift between before, where you'd have, in the world of publishing, for example, a publisher and an author, and the people who read, and then maybe like, oh yeah, there's like Patreon, where the people who sponsor the creator, they have some level of communication, but they're not really directly benefiting. I'm really interested in, not all DAOs are like this, but I'm really interested in, can you, as a consumer, create ownership in something just by consuming? I think there's something very fascinating about that. Like, imagine if every time you purchase something on Amazon, you like got a bit of Amazon stock. I'm not saying that's exactly what's going to happen, but like some sort of paradigm shift where we are all owners. And I think a lot of people, they're like, oh, hey, I should have, invested in Netflix when I first started using Netflix. I started using Netflix when they were still sending DVDs. What if anything that you consume, a part of it, you get like a part of something, you get like some ownership or something over the company. It's not that every individual is making decisions for every little thing.
On this, I want to sort of now start talking about PictureBookDAO. If you had to summarize the vision, what would that be?
The vision/mission, I guess, of PictureBookDAO would be to make hard things easy and fun and accessible to people. And right now it's through the medium of picture books, so children's style picture books. But maybe in the future we would be able to expand to other forms of medium.
Right. Okay. And why exactly did you pick a picture book?
Here's an example where I think it's important to distinguish between why I think a picture book is a good idea and how I came up with the idea of a picture book. Because a lot of times in interviews with people who start things, they'll conflate like the motivation for doing something or why it's a good idea with how it happened. And that, I think, leads to other potential founders going like, well, I don't have that motivation yet. I don't have that idea yet. And then they just never get there. But to answer your question, why I think picture books are great for this purpose is that a lot of times people don't learn, myself included, especially myself, I don't take the time to go learn something because I think I don't have time for this. And also like, it just sounds really hard and like kind of complicated and, whereas with a picture book, that removes those two psychological obstacles where you're not going to think, oh, I don't have time to learn about this. It's, you can just flip through it while in the toilet. Okay. And it also removes the psychological burden of this is going to be too complicated, because if you think, hey, like a kid can understand this, of course, it's going to be fun too. There's also this novelty. So I'm hoping to introduce more people to these concepts that otherwise they may not come across through this medium.
Right. Okay. So you're having to go and do your own research and then dumb it down to the level of a 5-year-old, for instance. But by doing that, you are learning yourself.
Yes.
In a non-technical way, right? They
Yeah.
say the best way to learn is to teach, and you are sort of teaching via the medium of these books, and I think that's going to be very, very valuable. Okay, so why then start a DAO? Why not just say, do you know what? I am going to self-publish. You could have just done that as well. So what's the motivation for that?
Before I get to that part, I do want to add one thing to the previous question, which is that for anybody who's like listening to this and wondering like, oh, I want to start something, I want to tell you like, okay, how did I come up with a picture book? Because it almost sounds like I had the problem of like, oh, people like concepts are hard and like a picture book's the solution, and like that's how I came up with it. But that's actually not what happened. What actually happened was that, I was part of this other group. We all had to come up with ideas for what we could do together. I looked at the lists of skills we all had, and none of us were willing to contribute any technical skills. It was stuff like drawing, writing, and marketing. And I was like, okay, like this idea just happened through that. And in hindsight, I'm now telling people, oh, it's because like a picture book's great for the mission. It like really fits. But I really wanted to call attention to this difference between the process of how something happens and what story gets told by people afterwards, because it's a better story for me to tell. And it's true, it's not false that, hey, like I have this vision, because it does resonate with me a lot for personal reasons. And I do think a picture book is a great way to go about it. But it didn't happen in that order. It wasn't like, hey, I want to solve this big problem, and here's like how I'm going to go about it. It was like, hey, I just have this idea, and then like thinking backwards, it kind of all makes sense. But a lot of times, if you're watching this and you're like, I want to start a DAO, or I want to start something, just think about like what things like interest you and like go from there, and you can like fill in the details afterwards. It doesn't come in the, oh, I have this big mission, and then I have like the best way to reach that mission, and then that's like opposite, and that's not how it usually comes across when people talk about how they started companies and how they started different things. It always sounds like the motivation and the mission came first, and then they found a solution to that. Whereas a lot of times it's more messy.
It wasn't like you were this genius that just came up with this perfect.
No, and that's something like I really take issue with. I don't think it's intentional, but a lot of interviews with founders, they always tell the story. It may not. It's probably for brevity, because it's more easy to comprehend and it tells a better narrative. But it almost always sounds like so and so had some problem, like the guy who started Dropbox. It's like I was like on a bus or something. I needed to like access my stuff, and like the idea for Dropbox came. In reality, he was like looking for ideas, like actively testing out different startup ideas, and had been like experimenting with different like storage technologies. And then he was apparently on a bus at some point, and like things started to click. But it's not like he was just going about his daily life, and then like one day like lightning struck. And I think I often talk to people who want to start things, and they're like, oh, I don't have an idea, where I'm like waiting for something to like show up. And it's like, ideas don't just, maybe it does occasionally, but most of the times it doesn't like just hit you. It's sort of like, it was the podcast discussion group, it was their DAO, it was, I threw out an idea. I don't want to take the track from the vision, because it is very important to me to make things that are hard and not and alienating more accessible to people. But it didn't happen in that order. So like, why DAO for this as opposed to just like write a book? And so like the practical reason was like I fell into this, so like great, it works. But like why I think it makes more sense to do it as a DAO than to just like self write it and publish it is primarily because I am very interested in like the dynamic of how a consumer can become an owner just through the act of consuming. So I want to use this to explore that. And the ultimate goal of this is to try to reach as many people as possible, make not just crypto, but other concepts more accessible to people. And I have the hypothesis that doing it in the form of a DAO, where there's greater a community engagement, where that community engagement isn't just lip service or like a marketing thing, but it is fundamental to the structure of how things are set up. I hypothesize that that is more effective than doing it where I just write it and then like try to market it to people and email people, you know, where companies spend so much money trying to get in contact with customers and doing like customer research so that they can create something that's better. Well, you have a structure where the potential customers are already like both incentivized through novel ownership structures, as well as just, you know, engage from the beginning. Like you're much more likely to be creating something that solves their problem and makes sense for your customers.
You come from a product development background, and I think you know the importance of being close to the customer. And I think by having those who buy your books or get involved in the DAO, having that sort of community building around you and getting that feedback loop as you iterate all the time, I think is going to be very, very important.
Yes. And this is really experiment to see, okay, like, does this make for a better product, right? Does it mean that we'll reach more people, both because people are incentivized to pass it on, but also because the product in itself is better, just because of the different way that the product development journey is structured differently. I'd love to get in contact with anybody who feels resonance with the mission to a certain extent. I can talk a little bit more about that. Or just like is interested, please, like, if you're willing, I'd love to like ask you a couple questions or just do a short poll so that like from the very beginning, I'm starting to understand, okay, like who else feels similarly to me and is interested in this, and if so, why, and like what are you looking for, and like let's create, you know, something where that is like important right from the very beginning. So it's not like I've written a book, but it turns out like people liked it because of a totally different reason than like I expected it, or like maybe people don't like it, or this is more just like, let's put everything at the beginning, so we're building for that.
And I think actually I was going to come onto this a bit later, but I think now is a good time to sort of talk about the philosophy of a DAO and things being decentralized. What does decentralization mean to you in the context of this DAO? Because I don't want to answer on behalf of you, but I can imagine it being chaos if you said to anyone, hey, if you buy my token, you can help us pick the characters, story, do the illustrations. Like, I can just see it not going anywhere. So have of what decentralization in the context of this DAO means.
I wish I could tell you like, hey, like members are going to be able to do blah, 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 blah. No idea. That's why like I want to get in contact with people to see where the interest is. But in this DAO, I will be writing the book. I have an illustrator, and I can tell you more about, you know, that later, but she's going to draw the stuff. But I do want to know, okay, maybe there is like room for decisions, like should the main character be like a cat or a bear or a panda, or, you know, maybe that's cute. Maybe people don't care about that. Maybe they're like, hey, I don't care. So yeah, like to answer the question, like what does decentralization mean? I think there's like the technical answer of the technology that allows for, you know, the technology that allows for decentralization, where it isn't just like one person or one group of people, location having the final say on stuff, but there's also like the spirit of it. And I think that can really vary. Like in some DAOs, it's very much like we vote on everything. Whereas in other DAOs, it might be like, hey, like there's a different relationship between execution and hopefully, like if you're a member, you believe in the execution ability of the people who are executing. Maybe there's like, I don't know. The answer is I don't really know exactly how it's going to work. But I think the spirit of it is that, again, people do have, like, members and consumers will have more power and more ownership. To what extent that applies to, I'm not sure yet.
You know what? And I think that's great. The fact that you don't have a white paper or a blueprint, and you don't know yet what membership is going to look like in the DAO, and you don't know yet what it means for token holders or NFT holders. You don't even know if you're going to have NFTs yet, and that doesn't matter. Sometimes it can just be a little bit overwhelming and sort of
Yeah.
putting the cart in front of the horse without actually taking a step back and saying, well, hang on a minute, let's just do this step by step and figure it out along the way and as we go. And
Yeah.
I think that's definitely the mentality that you seem to have for this, right?
Yes, that's definitely my mentality. It's also part of my personality to an extent where I like to plan for things, but I don't know. Like I'd like to know that I'm right. And I'm
Yeah.
like, I'd like to know that I'm right when I put something out there. And I don't know if I'm right because I don't know what people want.
That makes sense. So tell me let's talk about the sort of the psychological, emotional side of things.
I struggle against that feeling of like, oh, who am I to be doing this? But it's also like, okay, I'm not telling anyone that this is the best way or the only way. It's just this is my experience. So I think that's one thing. I also want to talk about in terms of like the emotional aspect. It kind of goes to one of our other topics, which is what is success and failure. Earlier you mentioned, we want to set expectations that it is okay to fail. And this is an experiment and it might fail. I want to add to that and challenge, for people watching, challenge your view of what success means and what failure means. It's funny because when I was thinking about this, the worst case scenario was so much easier for me to come up with than the best case scenario. But as I was writing down the best case scenario, I realized that I was afraid, if not more so, of the best case scenario than the worst case scenarios. And I was like, okay, the best case scenario, we reach a ton of people. A lot of people are inspired to start DAOs. A lot of people love the idea. They understand crypto a little better. They're interested in learning more. There's interest in more books and more topics. Maybe other DAOs want to collaborate with us. Maybe we'll create cartoons. We'll do merch for little kids. The books will be in school libraries. It is terrifying. It's actually horrifying. Like the best case scenario. It's like much worse than the worst case scenario because it's sort of like, okay, firstly, like people probably aren't going to take the time to send me hate mail because like they just have better things to do. Like who cares? Like who cares about me that much? But like if it goes well, it's like, what if I don't have time to do this? Like what if I don't want to do this? Like how is this going to change my life? Like what if I let people down? Like the best case scenario, it can, when you're starting something new, I just think for me, it's always helpful to call out best and worst case scenarios because I think there's subconscious fear and that fear can be very, very powerful and insidious because it is oftentimes subconscious, especially on the best case scenario side, because everybody thinks I'd love to achieve success, but there's actually, I think, a lot of fear around the changes that come with success and feeling like, hey, like, what if I can't handle this? What if, like there's like fear around success as well. So just kind of calling out these two things, I think just helps alleviate. It doesn't make the fear go away, but at least it makes it less subconscious. I won't be sabotaging myself because these fears are motivating me more than my conscious decision-making power. And that brings me to, let's distinguish between best and worst case scenario and failure and success, because those are different things. It's much more helpful for me personally to define success and failure around things that I can control solely. And what that means is, okay, so like for success for this DAO, I cannot control if people will watch this or if they'll watch this and like this. What I can control is, I can commit to showing up, once every 2 weeks. And every time I show up, I'm going to make sure that I share at least one thing, that I'd rather not share, something that is uncomfortable. I can't control if other people will find, the honesty interesting or useful to them, but I can have the hypotheses that like, hey, this will make it more valuable and I can do this one thing. So like for me, that's an example of like a very practical, tangible success, something for me to work towards. Another thing is like I can't control whether or not people are going to like the book, if it's going to make sense to them. But what I can control is I can commit to writing it. The editor of Entrepreneurship Magazine in his podcast, he's like, when you start something, your taste will far exceed your ability to execute on it. So I kind of commit to writing this book. I do not know if it will be a good book, if other people will judge it good, but like I know that at the end of 3 months, hopefully like not in 3 months, hopefully it's much sooner, I will have a book. It
Yeah.
may or may not be a good book. And I can't control if they'll like it, but what I can control is I can talk to 10 people who have never heard anything about crypto before and try to explain, and iterate my explanation to them. And then I can write a draft, and then I can show this draft to 3 people who do understand crypto, and then 2 kids, and then 2 other people who don't know anything. And just like I can, that's kind of like the product work is,
Yeah.
I can't control the outcome. I can control the process. So in this case, it's like, I'm not going to focus on, hey, I want to like have X $100 in sales, or I want to reach like Y people. It's like, let me focus on the things I can focus on, which is let me talk to people ahead of time and do customer research, and let me like iterate and test on my ideas so that I know before launch how, like, what things make sense, what things don't make sense. I can't necessarily control other things, but I can put my attention on the things that I can control. And ultimately, the fundamental part of that is just like committing to showing up. I think the most important thing is like there will be a book, and it will be a book that was created through principles of product development that I think makes sense, and a lot of people agree. And hopefully like that's good enough. If you have the goal of something that is outside your control, like X dollars of, it's not that you don't care about those things. So I want to distinguish between success metrics and success tasks. Whereas success tasks, like I wrote a list, it's like show up to videos, complete the book, set up the DAO on Colony, have at least one other DAO member that I did not personally know, and like make at least $1 on DAO related something. And it's just like, okay, those tasks, it define like what I'm going to do.
Cool. Okay, so I want to touch on resources. I want everyone watching this to know the situation. Who's currently working with you? Is it just you and the illustrator? Who's in the team, and where are you in the process?
It's just, yes, it is just me and the illustrator. So it started out with just me. So if you're like starting this, you don't need like other people. You can just be by yourself, or you can like grab a friend. But it just started out with me. I knew that I've never written a children's book, and I don't consider myself a writer. But I figured that the reading level of a child is probably lower than my vocabulary level. So I'm like, I can probably do this. And, I'm like, okay, I think I can do this. So I knew I could do that. I can do a little bit of drawing, but that was something I was like, I'm probably not going to be able to draw like 30 something. So I found this illustrator.
It's yourself, there's an illustrator, and then that's it, right? So far. Okay.
So far, yes.
And what is your you mentioned your day job is your own company as well. So how much time have you got to commit to this? You're not full-time DAOs, are you?
No, I'm not. I don't know how much time I have to commit to this, but I am committing to writing the book, starting the DAO, and so however much time as I need to. But I'm thinking like on average, it's going to be like 1 to 2 hours a day, not including weekends. So I think that should be doable. Who knows? Maybe next week I'll be like, holy shit, like I've been off way more than I can chew. I'm very lucky in that I do have flexibility in my day job, which is a very similar type of work. And my investor is very like open-minded about this and is interested. So I feel confident that I can do what's necessary to get the work done. And I'm hoping it won't take more than like 2 hours a day, but we'll see. I guess we'll find out.
Okay, let's talk about the money. You haven't got any VC funding for this DAO, do you?
No.
Not token sale yet, or NFT drop. So you're bootstrapping this.
Yes.
Apart from the fact that Colony will be funding the DAO's treasury with $500 every month to cover some of your expenses. Obviously, I don't think that's going to cover all of your expenses. So you're obviously willing to commit some of your own funds, or how are you going to do this?
Yes. So it does turn out that I think $1,500 over the course of 3 months will cover the illustration costs. We're cutting it very close. But that's like that's a good point about, I love working in this kind of like Web3 decentralized way, because while I think there is still a place for conventional employment, we need conventional employment for a lot of reasons. It's like, hey, like, I don't care if this person has worked like 40 years before. She can draw, and she can draw like to the specifications, at least so far that I've seen. And she doesn't charge that much. I don't know if she's like still in school. She's also like in a different economy where $1,500 like means much more to her than it would mean to someone like in a different currency. So like it just allows for this sort of like it makes this a little bit more feasible. Whereas like if I had to go and find like hire an illustrator through an agency, I don't think
Yeah.
$1,500 would even cover like a sample. Whereas like I
No.
think I can get like 32 illustrations
Yeah.
with that. So, but I don't know. I will just
Yeah.
like pay for it because it's gonna hopefully be done within the first month. Like the book will be done within the first month. So I'll just like pay for it, and then
Okay. Yeah.
I imagine there'll be other costs. So
Yeah.
I'm thinking of it this way, in that if I had to sign up for a course to learn about DAOs and to learn about whatever, I'd be paying. I mean, I paid a lot of money for my degrees. Let me just put it that way, like a lot of money. And in hindsight, like maybe I should just put that money in starting my own company. No, sorry, Columbia. Like it was a great education, but still like very expensive, right? So I'm kind of thinking of it that way, where at the very
Okay.
least, it's like if I had signed up for a course, I'd probably have to pay some amount of money.
Absolutely.
But
Yeah.
yes, I am bootstrapping. I'm a big fan of bootstrapping because when you take money from other people, it always comes with strings. So yes.
Okay. I think the reason why Colony didn't say, listen, Lisa, we'll give you $5,000 a month is because we want you to be resourceful. We want to see whether you can do things on a limited budget and also have some skin in the game. Because, anyone who might apply for this program or the series going forward, we want them to know that actually we're not just going to pump money into your idea and
No.
see or hope that it succeeds. This is really us putting you in the spotlight and saying, well, okay, you clearly are tenacious, you clearly have the energy and the motivation, but you're also having to have a little bit of skin in the game as well. We're not just going to fund the whole thing for you.
Yeah, and I have to say that I think that it can be valuable, not just because it's like, oh, like it forces people to bootstrap or to be resourceful. It's like money can be a distractor. Like what I'm creating, it's okay. If what you're trying to do is build a building, then yeah, you need money because you need to like buy stuff. But this is a digital thing, so if I had a lot of money, I think also with, maybe this is a side note, like entrepreneurs who try to raise money, it's like that you should know what you need the money for. And just from coming from like an immigrant family and like certain cultural values, it's always been very much about like making sure there's like value for money. And I think that actually translates very well to product development, because I think if you throw money at things, it can obscure your results. It can really obscure your process because for example, like if I wanted people to be interested in the DAO, I could spend like a ton of ad money and I get like a ton of signups. It doesn't mean that they genuinely care, or maybe they do care, but like it can obscure your results.
It totally makes sense. And we're going to be very transparent going forward. Every time we talk, we're going to ask you, how much have you spent? And we're going to look at your treasury, and everything is on the blockchain anyway. So we can't really hide. Through this very open, public, transparent process, I think everyone's going to get a very clear understanding of what you've had to go through. Okay, so that covers sort of the resources. I want to now look at the sort of mid to long-term vision. Where do you think this could go over the 3-month period? Let's not go too far in the future.
Yeah. Even 3 months feels like a long time, but hopefully I'll have definitely a book written that I've had validation on through like testing that, hey, like this makes sense. And that will also have some number of DAO members, whether that's just like Discord members or they're like people who've monetarily contributed through like some thing that we've yet to decide yet, that feel that they're interested in the vision that we've discussed around making hard things more accessible to people. And hopefully there is a plan for going the next step, because with the recognition that yes, this book, it will exist. It may not exist in the perfect form or in a good enough form, but there is a plan hopefully for either the next book or like a rewrite of this book. I don't know though if maybe like we'll decide like animation's better, or a lot of the details are unclear, but I hope that at the end of this 3 months, there's enough momentum that it can continue to go forward in whatever way makes sense at that point.
Sense. Okay. So you mentioned other people getting involved. You are going to be focusing largely on the research and the writing. Your
Yes.
illustrator is doing the illustrating, but you'll need other people's expertise and skills as well. So
Yes.
what type of contributors do you think you'll first be inviting into the DAO to come and contribute? I'm not saying that's next week or even the week after, but I'd like anyone who's watching this and who is interested in the project to at least have an opportunity to get involved.
There's one thing that's very clear that I need, which is help on marketing and getting the word out there. And so I think this is something that hopefully this channel helps with that as well. But I would love a contributor who can do work around that, whether it's like posting on Twitter. Like I don't do any social media. So I guess Discord technically counts as social media, but it's like social anxiety. I'm like, so I would love someone who does not feel like horribly anxious when it comes to stuff like that, and can help us like get more potential people who are interested. But I think in a more earlier stage, I would love to just talk to people who are interested in this in any capacity. They may or may not like want to contribute, but just like if they're willing to do a short form of like, hey, what, like you were watching this or you heard about this, like why are you doing this form? Like it may not even be like, hey, jump on a phone call with me, although if they want to do that, I'd totally be open. But I think that's something that's really, really valuable for me right now, as well as like that customer research of who might be interested in this beyond just potentially reading the book down the line. Or even if that's all you care about, I'd love to hear that. So that's sort of two things, like one kind of larger as a group, and then maybe from then on, it can become more clear. I think as we work on the DAO and talk about it, it'll become more clear, like, hey, I might need some support on like tokenomics or stuff like that. But for now, it's very clear that marketing will be a need. And then just in general, I'd love to hear from people.
I want you to sort of just tell me more about your vision or your grand vision. Like if this was to become wildly successful, like really successful, and you're publishing lots of books and you've got like, I don't know, 500 or 1,000 people in your Discord, like do you have a grand vision for it, or does it not really matter right now? Do you just want to focus on the journey?
I do honestly just want to focus on the journey, but one thing that would be great, like if I could just like wish for it, I think it goes back to the mission and the vision, I guess, which is whether that's for children or adults. Let's just talk about, because that's something I haven't figured out yet. Will this primarily be for children, or will this primarily be for adults and just use the children's book as like a fun thing? I don't know yet. If it does end up being for children, I would love for the DAO to cover a range of topics outside of like technology and stuff. My generation, I've experienced a lot of difficulties around being a minority and being a woman, et cetera, but not as much as the generation before me. Like the women that came before me and my professors in college, that they paved the way, and like the women before them, they paved the way, and other groups as well. So I would hope that if it's children who end up being the target demographic, that they can grow up in a world where they never have to feel like something isn't for them. And I think that's like really important to me. And that goes back to why, like, that's not how I came about this project, but that's like a really deeply personal reason why it's important for me to do this, so that so that maybe the next generation or the generation after us, there's never a sense of like, oh, like I'm not gonna pursue this career or this interest because I don't see people like me doing it. I have this like internalized view that like it makes me less of who I am, or it's just like it's not for me, or like who am I to think that I can do this? Like I think I hear that a lot. That's been a big part of my experience, and I would really hope that for our next generation, that becomes less and less, and that they don't have to grow. So if this becomes wildly successful, like we have a lot of different types of books covering a lot of different topics, like kids will read that and just like they'll never have to overcome the feeling of, hey, like this is for me, like why not? It would just be natural. So I think for kids, that would kind of be the clearest sort of best case scenario. And if it's for adults, I think it is like a version of this as well, where there are people who, for a variety of reasons, are it's not just about crypto. I think it's about these harder concepts, and it could be like STEM stuff, but it could also be like questions of gender or identity. And there's just like a lot of things that are hard, and I'd love to be able to make that easier.
Okay, that's awesome. Well, you've got to dream big, right? I think, yes, it's important to focus on the next step and the step after that, but you got to have a grand vision and what your ultimate vision, if you could sort of have a magic wand, and what it would turn into, and just have that in mind, and just something to strive for all the time, which is awesome. Okay, cool. I want to just talk about, what are you going to be working on over the next couple of weeks until we meet again?
Yes, so I will be working on writing the book. So I've talked already to, I think, 4 or 5 people who don't know anything about crypto and blockchain and these concepts. I want to talk to some more, do a draft of the book, and hopefully have also validate if that book makes sense with other people, and also come up with a plan for the illustrator, because I'm going to be telling her what exactly to draw. And that's like, I haven't done that exactly before. So, in our next episode, I'll be able to report back and be like, okay, like this was really tough, or like it does. Hopefully in 2 weeks, I'll have the book written and the illustration, like she's gotten everything she needs in order to draw it. So that everything from then on, I can start to, maybe that's a little ambitious, we'll see, but that's my goal.
Okay, great. Well, you can tell us about it the next time we meet. How do people support this project and get involved? But you don't yet have a Twitter, and there isn't a Discord yet, right? Okay, so do you have a personal Twitter that you want to share, or how can people reach you?
Let me just like it's going to be in the links, because I had a Twitter for my cat, but I've never used it, and I don't even remember what it is called. So I will set everything up, and then we will put it in the show notes and let people sort of follow you or join whatever it is. So yeah, just the agenda for the next episode 2, is really just going to be about looking at what you've actually done. Yes.
And some of the big decisions that you've had to make, some of the things that you're really struggling with. I think it's really important for us to show the things that could be a challenge, or that is a challenge, and possible solutions and ways that you're trying to overcome that. But we're also going to get our hands dirty and actually start a DAO on Colony. So we're going to set you up, and we're going to mint some tokens. We don't know how many, and we don't know who we're going to send those tokens to yet, but it doesn't matter. We're just going to start getting the ball rolling on that. We're actually going to show people like what that process looked like, so we can do a little product demo and just actually get people to understand how Colony is fitting in with this. Okay, Lisa, well, I thought we were going to talk for like 30 minutes, and we've gone way over. Thank you very, very much for joining me. And unless you've got any other questions or comments, I'll see you in a couple of weeks' time.
I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Okay, thank you so much.
Right. Thank you.